Things in video games can change very quickly when new updates arrive, and such is the case with Stardock's massive update at version 3.0 called Hyperlane for Galactic Civilizations 4. It arrived on the 12th of June with a cascade of new systems that really reshape the way we explore, wage war, and manage our empires in the game. So this is an entirely free update, and much of it has been based on player feedback over the recent years. And it's also a change that will fundamentally change how players are going to navigate around the galaxy. What's more, during the game setup, that's when you're creating a new map, you do have some ability to customize how you want to use some of these new features. Now we're going to do a bit of a deep dive here into what this update is all about, and this video, by the way, is sponsored by Stardock, so do check out all the links in the video description there, where you can find out everything you need to know, and my thanks to Stardock for that. So, this change really is a star-changing one. The new Hyperlanes bridge far-apart systems. They're essentially a rapid-fire way to move from one star system to the next across massive distances at very, very high speeds. There's also a new fleet supply limit. This will effectively control and dictate how many starships you can actually build and control inside all your fleets. So, yeah, this is going to change things, meaning you're going to need more discipline in galactic warfare. There's also been some changes in how the maps are generated, some smarter AI, balanced economies, dozens of user interface improvements as well, some technical implementations as well as some graphical changes and a tighter integration with Steam Workshop as well. Overall then, this is a very big change for the game, and Stardock themselves have said it is a culmination of the various lessons they've learned over the multiple DLCs that they've released over the years. So then, one of the big changes for Galactic Civilization 4 are the maps. As you may remember, if you've played before, you can choose the size of these galaxies from very small to very large and pretty much everything in between, but it could arguably be said that they've all felt static in the sense that star systems were evenly spaced across each sector. Many players knew roughly what to expect with this. Version 3 throws that assumption straight out of the airlock with the new map generation system, which now allows clusters of star systems to form, even within a single sector. In practice, this means that one part of your galaxy might be a tight, resource-rich knot of worlds, while another region yawns empty and silent. This means the game is asymmetric, and many people tend to feel that this can bring a very good dynamic interactivity and gameplay when it comes to grand strategy and 4X titles. So yeah, the asymmetry here was implemented after the devs realised that most, over 90% of players, stuck to single sector games. The old flat layouts then were simple, and they often led to long treks through empty space before you could expand. With star clusters though, the void gains architecture. Some players spawn in the packed clusters that brim with worlds, minerals and tech ruins at the outset, whilst others are marooned on far-flung systems with empty space between them. And what they may lack for in abundant resources, they initially can gain from the fact that they're essentially cut off from all the threats of the rest of the universe, at least until later in the game. The concept here then is to bring variety to the different play sessions. But here's the thing, clustered worlds can also present a problem. How does a player, for example, get from one island of stars to the next without spending an age and a dozen turns wandering from place to place? Well, here we come to star hyperlanes. These are another new feature, and they're essentially hidden subspace conduits that link distant stars, rendered on the map as straight lanes between the systems. To access these, you need to research a new technology called subspace scanning. These hyperlanes are then revealed when you enter any area of the hyperlane with your ship. They receive a dramatic speed boost, up to a 500% boost actually, making the previously slower treks feel far more instantaneous. Now I think it's also important to point out at this point that both Hyperlane as well as generating your galaxy with the clusters of stars are both optional features. When you create your map at the start of the game, it lets you choose a Hyperlane frequency as well as sector layout. So if you want the classic Galactic Civilization experience, you can dial Hyperlanes to none and sector layout to uniform, and then you'll be back to where you were before. But crank up the Hyperlane prevalence and suddenly every major cluster in a sector is bridged by subspace highways. There's even been some speculation that eventually owners of megastructures may well be able to build their own hyperlanes, which would really add the ability to connect arbitrary systems on demand. Now, another change that comes with the Hyperlane update is the Fleet Supply Cap. This is a global cap on the number and class mix of ships you can field at once. Each ship class has a supply cost, and once your empire hits the cap, you can't build another vessel without decommissioning an existing one, or alternatively having that ship destroyed. Now mechanically, this plays like a natural evolution of the existing logistics concept with limited ships per fleet. Now, logistics still exists for individual fleets, but logistics plus fleet supply together enforce a new balance. Fleets can't multiply endlessly, and a failed war has more palpable consequences. From a player's perspective, it introduces a fresh layer of strategy. Now, I've had games here where I used to just crank out dozens of ships, probably many of you done the same, essentially cranking out dozens of shock fleets and then using them to simply overwhelm the enemy. Now that's no longer so easy, and you really have to pause and weigh up each production of ships. And that means each class of ship, be it nimble or gigantic, has distinct value. Essentially, you're forced to make a choice here, and it's a striking shift from all-out quantity to quality. Now, the developers have explained that they feel that the cap here is generous, and it does scale up with the map size. I personally haven't had any issues here so far, so you won't find yourselves, at least theoretically, hopelessly outgunned in a big galaxy. In practical terms, a huge or immense galaxy still lets you amass a sizable navy, but it won't allow unlimited Zerg assaults. All that said, the fleet cap can be increased thanks to the gain of new planetary improvements and technologies that increase the cap, giving us ways to invest in logistics and science for the war effort. Ultimately, the developers' goal here is to have a more thoughtful late-game military planning. If you lose half your fleet, for example, in a surprise attack, it actually hurts, and it actually puts a very different focus on how you deal with your fleets. Elsewhere, there's an upgrade to AI, and here the developers have said that the AI decision-making is now smarter. Enemies and allies alike explore more energetically, colonize more logically, and handle diplomacy and research priorities with a little bit more savvy. Where this gets really interesting is the most dramatic change, which is adaptive AI. And here, at higher difficulty settings, the AI will now detect if it's falling behind and then ramp up its competence to give you a better fight. In effect, the AI is less fixed and far more dynamic, and in practical terms, theoretically at least, it does mean that veteran players can now feel a real challenge as they set the AI to brutal. Moreover, the AI's economy and research have also gotten some tweaks as well. They now pursue new techs like extra fleet supply with more consistency, and they are a bit more aggressive about civilization-wide bonuses and building improvements. And on the diplomacy front, minor things like treaty exploration and border penalties also given some polish. Altogether, the AI feels, well, more alien, a bit more challenging as well. So hopefully this is an option that a lot of people out there are going to want to use and make benefit of. Now, the Hyperlane update is not just about gameplay improvements and changes. There's also some UI improvements here, as well as the quality of life updates as well. For example, the version 3 update does streamline Galactic Civilization's interface, so you spend less time hunting through menus and more time actually running the Empire, I guess. Now, a revamped Civilization data screen now lists every global bonus, whether that's military, economic or cultural, and all of this on a single panel, which does eliminate some of the tooltip digging that many of us have found ourselves doing over the years. Beside it is the new Graphs tab, and this turns long-term stats such as income, fleets, population and more into simple trend lines that you can compare at a glance. Across the HUD, the clutter is down, there's a lot less overall clutter. Trade resources have moved into a collapsible pop-out, freeing space for core yield, and long-requested civilization focus selector now sits visibly on the overview screen. War management feels sharper thanks to the upgraded war aims bar that tracks captured worlds and war exhaustion timers in real time. Elsewhere on the interface, you'll find the Mod Manager button, and this does something pretty neat. It takes you directly to the Steam Workshop. And this is another of the pretty big improvements that's come with version 3. The Steam Workshop integration was a special target for improvements, and the developers noted that previously adding new ships and mods was a little bit clunky, so they streamlined the flow here. Now, sharing a new spaceship design or improving a community mod is far more responsive. You'll also find that there's a new Mods Manager button in the main menu. In one click here, you can launch the web browser into Galactic Civilizations 4 Workshop, and all of this is categorized and ready for browsing. All of this then should make it far more easier to really get into those mods and whatever else you want from the Steam Workshop. Tighter integration there is always a welcome feature in pretty much any game, and there's no exception here. This same theme is true. Elsewhere, you can find a few graphical improvements as well. I'm not going to go into too much detail on these, but they are certainly worth mentioning. There's enhanced anti-aliasing. This has been improved. Smarter model smoothing, so the render now anti-aliases the individual ship components against each other so that starships appear a little bit more cohesive here. There's also been some improvements to zooming in and zooming out. Overall, you can expect a little bit better performance there when zooming in and out around your empire. Now, that's most of the changes for Hyperlane. There are some more as well, but I've touched on the biggest ones. But in this part of the video, I want to talk about something else, which is the idea of veterans and newcomers in Galactic Civilization 4. So with so much changed, who is the new Galactic Civilization 4? Well, the design for version 3 makes me think of two audiences here, the seasoned 4X veteran and the newcomer. For players who've logged thousands of hours and thousands of turns into the game, Hyperlane's changes may at first feel like leaning into a new system. There's quite some changes here, specifically when it comes to movement. For example, you might find yourself reflexively plotting the old way, system by system, only to remember that, I have hyperlanes now. And there's an initial adjustment period. The hyperlanes aren't everywhere, obviously, but where they do exist, they do make great benefit. And then there's the fleet supply cap. This is going to be a pretty big change for people to get used to. An empire that once relied on sheer numbers, for example, to overwhelm foes is going to need to rethink a bit here. Dumping all industry into factories to flood the galaxy with ships is much less viable with this supply cap. But I suspect veterans will appreciate these changes because ultimately they really do mean that you've got to think a little bit more and plan your empire building out. For newer players, you may find that the initial few turns, the start part of the game, is a little gentler because it's less of a rush now. Although this will largely depend on the type of map that's been generated for you. If you're in a cluster of stars, for example, that doesn't have a whole lot of resources, you're going to find your initial few turns a little bit slower, which means there's a little more time to plan and more time to think through exactly what you're doing, and less of a rush to get everything done right up front. So yeah, with these types of maps, and probably quite a good thing for new players, there's a lot less front loading here for planning out your empire. The clusters are also pretty interesting because these do provide both challenges as well as some benefits. Challenges because obviously if you really want to expand, you've got to get way across the galaxy to the other clusters. Sometimes these can be quite nearby, sometimes they can literally be on the other side of the galaxy or the other side of the massive sectors. The benefits here though are pretty good, especially for newer players, especially if you prefer the game not to be too challenging initially, because you're kind of confined to your own sector, which means that the other powers in the galaxy are not going to be on top of you straight away. Although it can happen, sometimes they'll get the Hyperlane technology quite quick and they'll appear in your own sector. More often than not, they will remain in their own cluster and away from you, giving you a little bit more freedom in those initial few turns. Ultimately then, combined together, these are some pretty big game-shifting changes for Galactic Civilization 4. And yes, some of these are pretty fundamental changes, which means they may take some players a bit of time to get used to or adjust to. But keep in mind that if you don't want things on, such as hyperlanes, or if you don't want the star clusters on, you can pretty much disable these and retain the original Galactic Civilization 4 experience. And yeah, it's also an update that pretty ties quite neatly into many of the other expansions and DLC that have been updated over the years. And that includes things such as the Arcean Empire as well as megastructures. All of these benefit from the Hyperlane update. For example, megastructures, the planetary upgrades in megastructures, these all still work flawlessly on the maps with hyperlanes, and similarly other DLC races get some ship improvements with their graphical polish parts that we mentioned earlier. Overall then, big changes come to Galactic Civilization 4 here with the Hyperlane update. Do check out that link in the video description, and my thanks again to Stardock for sponsoring this video. Thanks for watching it all the way through. Do take care, and I'll catch you next time.